those newspaper clippings on the wall?
Oh, you saw those? Not very modest, is it? Should really take them down.
No, it's just... Who are you?
Plenty of time for that.
Welcome to Haunting the Narrative, a Lockwood & Co. podcast. I'm Mairead. I'm also Sapphire Fair on AO3 or Woman in Winter on Tumblr, and I'll be your host for this episode, which is ironic, given that of all of us, I generally have the least idea of what's going on. But fortunately, I am joined by some of the fandom's finest people, so please say hello, everyone.
That's not even a little bit true. Hi, this is Lizzie. I'm Shirako Orion on AO3 and Tumblr.
Hi, this is Natasha, or Hail Chi-Chi, wherever you hang out online.
And I'm Meg, so I'm Menina123 on AO3, and I am Menina89 on Tumblr.
Great. So, here we are on our third episode, and it's inevitable that at some point we would have to talk about him, the namesake character of our series, Mr. Anthony John Lockwood. But it's pretty typical, actually, that although the books are named after him, we never get any sort of direct insight into his mind. We only get to learn about him through Lucy, and that's pretty classic Lockwood, actually, because he's a person that's very deliberately difficult to get to know. But fortunately, Lucy loves a mystery, and so do we. So today we're going to be talking about the reasons why he is the way he is. We're going to talk about his dark backstory and how that links to the core traits and motivations that we see him display in the books. And actually, just as an FYI, before we get into it, there will be spoilers throughout pretty much all of our episodes for both the show and all of the books. So with the formalities out of the way, who is Anthony Lockwood?
Right, and that's a really good point. We'll have spoilers for both, but we are going to focus on book Lockwood, mostly because we know a lot more about him. We have a lot more specifics. The show is really very sparse with only the one.
The show needed to give us more than 8 episodes.
Yeah.
Sadly.
We would have gotten so much more in just like the next 10 minutes. Anyways, okay, so a quick recap of things that we know, sort of facts about Lockwood. So he's the son of Celia and Donald Lockwood, who were researchers into the problem. They died in a car crash when he was 6 years old. He was largely raised by his sister Jessica, who was 6 years his senior. She died when he was 9. He had an uncle, apparently. We only know this because of the interview. I don't think he's ever mentioned again. We have no idea what happened to him aside from he died of a heart attack and was nice.
And he liked to hunt, so he probably had money.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's a good point. So Lockwood was probably upper middle class, we think. We might have a whole episode discussing class a bit later. But just, he owns a house in Marylebone. Am I saying that right?
I looked this up to make sure because I know as the English person you're going to be looking at me. Yeah, it's Marylebone or Marylebone?
Marylebone.
Marylebone.
Is it French?
Either Marylebone or Marylebone. Both are okay. It's not French. It's...
Just weird.
The disgust. No, it's just this English thing of like weirdly eliding long words into one. Like Magdalen College in Oxford is actually spelled Magdalen. Crazy stuff.
Yeah, a lot of it is either like it's Celtic or it's Anglo-Saxon or it's Norman or, and then over the centuries we've just butchered it.
All right, getting away from linguistics and history. Yes. Let's get back to Lockwood's history.
This is the problem of having 2 translators on the pod.
All right, we'll never bring up linguistics ever again. All right, so his parents were researchers. They went on long trips to Southeast Asia. They left Lockwood and his sister in the care of a, what do you call it?
Nanny.
A nanny.
A nanny.
A governess.
Right, a governess. Is that?
No, that's Mary Poppins.
No, just
anyway,
a nanny.
Yeah.
That's very 19th century.
And I assume that even while they were gone, like Jessica must have been raising him a bit because they were on these long trips. So then after she dies, he gets picked up by gravedigger Sykes, who trains him. Nigel Sykes, as he's actually called. He is now deceased. He's the one who entered Lockwood into a fencing competition where he stabs Kipps in the arse, and that's the beginning of their relationship. And then at some point, Sykes dies, and we don't know how or when. But this eventually leads to Lockwood beginning the agency with George around the age of 14. Other than that, he's tall, he's good looking, he's good at turning smiles on people. The classic Barnes, put those teeth away.
Yeah.
And Lucy thinks he has long, slender fingers and an elegantly crinkled brow.
Hats off as always for an unhinged Lucy description.
Beautiful. That's the great thing about it is that's not even close to her most unhinged one. That's practically a normal one. But yeah, I mean, there's like even just in what you've said there, Lizzie, there's already contradictions hinted in there in those facts. Like, and I think it's these contradictions that make Lockwood so compelling. Like, you have on the one hand this happy family life that he had, and then the tragedy that blotted that out. And you have like the comfortable Marylebone home and the nanny, and then on the other hand, you have the fact that he chose like a really tough and dangerous career at a really young age. I mean, obviously based on his circumstances, but you know, he's a cluster of contradictions. So I think I wanted to discuss like some points of what he's like as a person. Like what are all these contradictions that he has? So I think the first thing that we see through Lucy's narration is that he's very charismatic. On her first night at Portland Row, this is as she's going to sleep on her first night at Portland Row, this is how she's describing him. Anthony Lockwood, vigorous and energetic, eager to throw himself into each new mystery, a boy who was clearly never happier than when walking into a haunted room, his hand resting lightly on his sword
Have you been
hilt.
listening to the
Again.
audiobooks?
I'm like wheezing over here listening to your reading of this.
So Lucy's a little taken with him, is what you're saying.
I mean, I think she's kind of like, you know, he's tolerable. Like, she tolerates him. Anyway, yeah, no, it definitely, she's hella into him. And I mean, we'll get into this more in when we get to Locklisle, but I think especially once he kind of backs her so completely, or did we discuss this in the Lucy episode? What even is time? Anyway, he's very charismatic. He's very self-assured. It definitely takes Lucy a while not a while, but it takes her a minute like to realize he's a teen like her. She says his manner had been so assured I hadn't noticed his age. So like I think this is the very first impression that we get of him as someone who's like quite charming and intelligent and adult like for a 15-year-old. But there is definitely a lot of debate as to how much of that is a front and how much of it is real.
I think a lot of it's real. He manages to exert quite a bit of influence. Lucy talks about, particularly later in the books, how much leadership he's able to give to the rest of the team. He's also very warm and welcoming, and I think that is really genuine. The way that he is with Lucy, he's very friendly. When he first meets her, he gives that great speech about how the past doesn't count and will focus on the future, and she's good enough to be part of the company, and he's seen that with his own eyes, and with or without her grade 4, which is exactly what Lucy needed to hear. So to some extent it is Lucy's bias coming out, but I think that reaching out to her and trying to make a connection, that warmth is genuine. He also shows, he's got a goofy side to him that I think is also very charming, even if it's not meant to be. The goofy lopsided grin, the shy private smile that he gives to Lucy. I think all of that is perfectly genuine.
It's definitely, there's some genuineness, whatever you want to call it, in there. But it's also a front in a lot of ways, isn't it? Like, he's got this, the way that you've just sort of described him, he's calm, he's suave, he's all of this stuff. But, he gets to the Fitzball, looks at everybody, says, yes, we're going to network, and then he goes, actually, let's go commit crimes instead. Because he's more comfortable breaking into...
Never more relatable.
So relatable.
Never more relatable.
But, you can go and talk to people, and it's something that, he definitely hits me as somebody who practices smiles in the mirror. He's been working on it, he's trained for it, he's psyched himself up for it, and he gets there and he goes, nah.
The Skull even says how much time he spends looking in the mirror, perfecting his hair.
The Skull is definitely an unreliable narrator.
I don't know, I kind of think he tends to tell the truth, doesn't he?
He does, but he does, like, I think
in the most blunt, uncomfortable way.
He tends to tell the truth in a way that suits his purposes. So, is it the whole truth or... Anyway, that's a different episode as well.
Anyway, the uncomfortable truth thing I think is very good for Lockwood, because Lockwood he does tell the truth, and he does have these moments where he's extremely genuine, but he's very uncomfortable with it. So at first you see his, charming, his polished exterior and all of that. And it takes you a little while to kind of realise that he doesn't actually give away any information about himself. So I really love, like, in the show, how very close at the beginning, like, Lucy goes, "Who are you?" Like, she doesn't know anything about him. Because you don't really realise this until kind of the end of the Screaming Staircase or the beginning of the Whispering Skull in the books, that, like, actually you know nothing about him. And Lucy talks about it as well. She knows nothing about him. He never looks back. He never talks about past cases. He never talks about his past. He never talks about their pasts. He's just focused on what comes next, let's do this now, you know? And then he does start to reveal tiny little bits. You know, he talks about the fencing thing. He starts, like, asking Lucy questions about her past. At the end of the Screaming Staircase, like, he's asking her about her past. But he's so uncomfortable with it that he's staring at, like, the mustard on the table while he's talking to her. He's not even looking at her. And this is, like, a theme.
Or he's like bolting from the room.
Yeah, he almost always just like bolts immediately after.
Yeah, he'll drop something and then he runs.
Whether it's an uncomfortable truth about himself or a necklace.
Right.
Yeah, the Fitzball thing again, like, he just, like, kind of holds out a necklace and says, "Here you go," and then he's like, "Close your mouth, you'll catch flies. Oh, look, taxi." You know, he immediately covers over it. So that polished, like, exterior is very, very much a front. It's so much a front.
Okay, I will give you that.
Yeah. I mean, but like you said, like, you know, there is, like, some genuine care underneath it. And, like, I think it's really telling that, like, kind of as the series goes on, you start to see a lot less of that polished exterior. Like, it's obviously still there, but it's always turned to clients and things. You know, he's obviously caring less about what people think of him and how people perceive him as he, like, deepens these connections that he has with George, Lucy, Holly, I guess Kipps when he comes on board as well. You know, by, like, the Creeping Shadow, he's pleased to be, like, rude to people who he's supposed to be looking up to, you know? And he turns around and he says, like, "We're not a respectable agency, that's fine." And that is something that, like, at the beginning, Lockwood would never, ever, ever have said.
Yeah, I mean, that growth is really remarkable to see over the course of the series. But I think it's also that growth that leads us to sometimes, or for the fandom to sometimes have some misconceptions about him, because he does change and evolve as the series progresses.
So many.
Yes. Yeah, many
Calm
misconceptions,
yourself.
but we'll just talk about a few right now. Which, my favorite one is that Lucy thinks he's so charming and so suave, but he's really such a dork. Like, I wouldn't even say under the surface. Like, it's right there if you look for the examples.
Mm.
And I have so many favorite ones, but he's sometimes silly and awkward. So, I mean, one of the best examples is his fondness for costumes and disguises and just over-the-top accents that aren't good.
Can we just say something like, if somebody listening right now has only seen the show and not read the books, you are so missing out, because when they go to Winkman's in the books, he's dressed in, like, a Hawaiian shirt, shorts, they've got sunglasses, lollipops. They're doing this full, like, "Oh, we're just ditzy tourist act."
I know, and that outfit was supposed to be like 4 sizes too big from him, wasn't it? Like hugely baggy shorts or something. I don't know.
It was super baggy.
I mean, they gave him the chair instead of the Hawaiian shorts. Like,
Very different vibe.
It's a very different vibe, which is something we might talk about more later on. But another thing that gets cut from the first season that is in the book, it's in The Whispering Skull, Lockwood calls Lucy that he says she looks like a sprightly crab, which is just, like, really something to say to, like, a girl that you may or may not have a crush on. Not the most flattering, smooth move he's ever, you know, made in his life. And then, of course, I think we're all very fond, as the fandom, of his example of right after Lucy has come back to Portland Row and the Creeping Shadow, he talks about how he likes to be a whale and, like, strain orange juice through his teeth. It's just, which is, like, an objectively...
He says it like it's the most normal thing ever as well. Like, "Oh, why don't you like this type of orange juice? You can pretend to be a whale." Like, what?
It's, like, the kind of...
I do think there's a little bit of, like, frantic, like, just mouth running to try and get the subject away from Holly.
Absolutely. He does it a couple of times in early The Creeping Shadow where he's just like, I don't know, talk, say anything.
But I think that points to, especially around Lucy, he's not as smooth and he's not as composed as maybe he wants to be seen.
But Lucy's too busy looking at his fingers to notice.
Okay. But I think another thing that sometimes maybe gets lost, and I think this wasn't shown quite as much in the show, is how also intelligent and how competent Lockwood is. He, knows a lot of random facts about military history. He's not academic quite like George, but he is just like rattling off that this is like a dagger from the 15th century and busting out other little bits of information.
Oh, yeah. In the show, George is the one who's like, oh, and you'll find these daggers in pairs. If you haven't read the books, Lockwood is the one who knows that. And he knows it because of his parents and like...
I mean, you assume, but like, why would his parents know about the gun? Because he identifies a gun and he immediately says, yeah, but they don't work very well unless you've stored them properly.
I always assumed that was the hunting uncle. Like, I personally have this like headcanon that the hunting uncle like taught him about guns and stuff, and maybe he would just take baby Lockwood on trips to the Wallace collection, which has an incredible collection of military artifacts and is very close to Marylebone. In fact, might even be in Marylebone.
Anyway, one way or another, Lockwood is a nerd.
Yeah, he's a total nerd.
Yeah, he's a total nerd.
He's a total nerd.
He's also willing to bet his life, actually, on that military history knowledge. Just like the whole thing with the gun in the catacombs and with Joplin and the books, like, he knows enough about the gun to bet his life that when your man tries to shoot him...
He flat out says, let's see if that one will shoot, doesn't he?
Yeah, like, and Joplin tries to shoot him, and the powder doesn't.
Of course, that may be that he's not putting a whole lot of value on his own life.
That's something we'll circle back to as well. But I think it speaks to how Lockwood is really good about taking strategically calculated risks. And he's just an incredibly strategic thinker, and he uses that in a variety of ways. I think one of the great examples of that is in The Creeping Shadow. We see him when George is playing chess, I think with Kipps, or with Hal? I don't remember.
No, with Danny. He's
with
playing
Danny.
it with the little
how could
boy
I forget
from the
Danny?
end.
How could I forget Danny? But George is playing chess, and Lockwood, is like across the room, and he's like, you're only 2 moves away from being checkmated. Like, he clocks it that easily, which, as someone who's not very good at chess, that is incredibly hard to do, I feel like. But Lockwood is just always constantly thinking 12 steps ahead and being making these big connections that end up being incredibly useful down the line.
Yeah, so we've kind of just actually touched on a really interesting point, which is there is this kind of tension between his strategic thinking, his calculating nature, and this really common interpretation of him as like being suicidally reckless, which I do think the show plays up an awful lot. Yeah, what do you guys think? Like, are they in conflict with each other or not?
Yes and no. He takes risks, but he always has a plan. Now, he doesn't always tell Lucy and George what his plan is. Coombe Carey is a great example of that. Like, he has a plan. He tips off that taxi driver, and he has a really good idea of what's going on, even if he misses a couple of salient details. But then he doesn't share the plan. He's resourceful. He's adaptable, even if that just means carrying around a lot of explosives in his pocket or under his hat.
Or in his wig, memorably.
Gets him out of trouble a few times.
Almost every book, honestly, explosives make an important appearance for Lockwood.
I want someday to do an episode on possible future careers for all the characters, and I will be arguing for Lockwood as bomb technician.
See, I would argue against that because bomb technician... No, wait, they don't defuse bombs. They just do controlled explosions. Never mind. No, yeah, he'd be in for that.
Anyway.
Bomb tester, maybe.
Yeah.
He also, he's the leader. It's his job to get between his team and danger. You could argue that rather than being suicidally reckless, he's just doing his job.
But that still points to him having a bit of a lack of self-preservation, which is something I think that's worth diving into a bit more.
Yeah, so I agree with Meg. Like, I think that if you think as the leader, okay, yeah, my job is to put the team first, I mean, that's great, but it does also show that maybe you think your life is less important than that of others. And like, okay, we could have, I think, and we will have at some stage a whole conversation about leadership in Lockwood & Co, because it's a really big theme of the books, which I love. But he is really casual about the possibility of his own death. Like there's that brilliant scene in the haunted circle at the end of The Creeping Shadow, like this big climax where they finally talk things over and they decide to get back together. I mean, get Lucy back together. But he says, yeah, she says, look, I'm really worried that I'm going to get you killed. And he says, yeah, let's face it, I'm not going to last long in any case at the rate I'm going.
Which is, I mean, they're agents. exactly. He's in the middle of a haunted circle. I mean, you know.
Yeah, but but it's so casual. Like it's not so much like, yeah, okay, he's doing a dangerous job, and it is a reality. It's like being a soldier or police officer or something. You go out there knowing, okay, this is a dangerous job, and it's a possibility I might get hurt. But I think there's a difference between, yes, I might get hurt doing this job, and I'm not going to last
Okay, but
long.
there is a very big difference between like the job that other agents are doing and the way Lockwood's doing it.
We do see over the Black Winter, like there's a definite lack of self-worth there in the way he starts taking greater risks when Lucy's not around. Like, I think we can't even explain that as him being driven. It's like some little bit of the part of him that's like attached to life, the part of him that cares, just kind of stripped away without her.
I will also say, I think his excuse is that he's driven. But I think other people from the outside are looking at him and like, yeah, he says that he has to take all these cases over the Black Winter because they have to strike while the iron is hot. But did he have to strike that hard? Did he have to strike that, did he have to take that many risks? Maybe not. Maybe he's depressed. Maybe he needs to work in order to cover his depression. Maybe he's kind of hoping something else will happen.
If they get big enough, if they get famous enough, if they get rich enough, they can get Lucy back.
Yeah.
See, but I think that's what he's saying. But is it true? Or is he in a bit of a place where he's like, well, if I died now, it wouldn't be the worst thing?
I mean, it can be all of the above. It can be, and I think it can change from day to day, honestly, with how he's feeling about it. I think especially if I think it's fair to say he was dealing with some kind of depression over the Black Winter. And those feelings can change and evolve over time. But I think he cares a lot about his goals still, even throughout all of that.
So yeah, that's an excellent segue into the question of what does Lockwood actually want to achieve? Because it's his aims and motives that really like drive the plot. He is kind of nominally the main character. So what is it that drives him personally?
That's a really, that's one of those questions that I feel like we could sit and talk about for hours and hours and hours, but we don't have hours and hours and hours because we all want to go to bed at some point. Yeah, to kind of like start going into that, you've really kind of got to look at his past, and you've got to peel back the layers of the onion, so to speak, And a big thing of Lockwood is actually like his family's deaths. And this actually took me like personally a very long time to kind of understand, because it kept popping up in the text, but it kept kind of being in this context of Lucy being really obsessed with it. And like, oh, it makes him so sad. And Lockwood's like, oh, I'm fine actually. I'm totally okay. But like, and this is another thing that I think the show did really well. Flo's like, oh, I love what you did with the place. And he says, I haven't done anything with it. Because his house, just a shrine to his family, isn't it? He hasn't touched anything. Like, everything's still on the walls. Everything's still as it was. It doesn't look like the type of house that a teenager would have. And Lucy clocks that immediately when she moves in. It's an expensive house with expensive looking things. And it's very, it's decorated in a very grown-up manner. But there's no grown-ups. And it's just Lockwood holding on to everything. And he really is holding on to everything.
When she goes into his bedroom for the first time and is like, there's no sign of him in this room at all. He doesn't want to change anything. He's afraid to erase any bit of history that he still has.
It's got like that painting of a place his parents went to on the wall. There's something about like green striped runners on the desks or something like it.
It's striped wallpaper, I believe.
It's very not Lockwood.
It's all super middle-aged.
Very, yeah. And it's like he knows all of these things. Like you kind of wonder if like as a kid he just kind of stood there and stared at everything in the house, because like, in the Screaming Staircase, George breaks that gourd in the front entry hall, and like there's a million different gourds and things all over the entry hall, isn't there? But he breaks it and they kind of turn it and hide it. And like Lockwood comes home and he's exhausted. He's been ghost touched. He's been dragged in for interrogation at DPRAC. He probably hasn't slept in about 48 hours at this point. And he walks in the door and one of the first things he says is, what happened to the gourd?
Yeah. So he's like, his attachment to his family, it's like, it's not directly said, but it is motivating him all the time. Like, when he takes Lucy to see like his family graves in the empty grave, I think this is like the key scene to me for understanding Lockwood. We have those three graves side by side and the one empty grave, and he goes there and he says, I don't want to be left out. So you can see how that like attachment to his family, it is driving him. But it's not only that, it's also the question of why did they die and not me? He literally says this in that scene in The Empty Grave. I thought I was being really revolutionary with this whole question of like, oh, Lockwood's looking for meaning. And then I went back and reread The Empty Grave and I was like, this is right there. This is completely like in the text. But it's like this whole effort to make sense of why he lived and when the rest of his family died. So it's kind of two things. It's like, why did his family die? Why did he live? Trying to make sense of that is what drives all his other like ambitions and motivations. Like they all feed back into this.
It's
core.
really interesting once you've read The Empty Grave and you know this about him. You go back and read books like The Hollow Boy, where he's pushing so hard to make the company really big. And you think he's really obsessed with, he's ambitious and he's obsessed with success. But really, it's about the family legacy. He's named the agency after his family. He goes by his family name. And he has become really fixated on the legacy that he wants to preserve for his family. And that is what's driving him to make the business as big as it is. And also what drives him to maybe make some poor personnel and staffing decisions.
I don't know. I mean, he made great ones, really. I mean, he's got George, he's got Lucy, he's got Holly is a fantastic administrator.
Okay, it's not the decision itself, it's the...
But not the managing it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's how autocratic his decision making is in those moments, I think. Like, because he's actually usually very democratic. Like,
No, he gets that way after the Screaming Staircase, doesn't he? Because like he has that moment where he's walking down the actual Screaming Staircase when he goes, "Oh my god, my decisions are gonna get them killed." I didn't tell you this. I didn't tell you what you should have known, and that's why we're all about to die, and it's all my fault. He has that moment down there, and then he starts actually letting them in on his plans.
And then you see at the beginning of The Whispering Skull, he takes a vote on who wants to pick up this bet with Kips. That's another change between the books and the show.
oh, that one grinds my
Yeah, because
gears.
Lucy and George are the ones who are like, no, we're taking this bet. And he's like, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, George is the one who's like super down to fight at all times in the books. So I definitely I do love Book George for that trait. But yeah, that whole kind of, it's my company and what I say goes, that kind of thing. To me, that's how in The Hollow Boy, Lucy talks about Lockwood having kind of a ruined space in him that sort of echoes the emptiness of like that locked room, Jessica's room. This inner hollowness that gives the third book its title.
I still think she's projecting.
I mean, he says it himself. He says, after Jessica died.
Yeah, but that was like 7 years before.
Yeah, but I think he's kept the room locked. I think he's still feeling a wee bit hollow.
All right, we're definitely going to have a Hollow Boy episode, and we will...
I mean, we're going to have like a Lucy and projection and grief episode as well.
Yes.
So we'll definitely get into this massive argument then.
We'll also need the boxing gloves for that one.
This is all haunting the narrative, right? I had to make it. I had to make the joke.
We're like contractually obligated to drop the title at least once per episode.
We've really been slacking off then.
Yeah, no, we're not. I made it up. There is no contract. This is a cry for help. They kidnapped me. I'm obligated to say that once per episode.
Says the host. Yeah, says the host.
Yeah, exactly. The host. What you can't see is that they're all pointing guns at me through the internet.
It's fine. We haven't stored them properly.
Yeah. But like to go back to Lockwood, I think if you get below the surface with him at all, like you get below the surface of him acting like a jerk in The Hollow Boy, what you're really running into there is the emptiness left behind by his family's death and the kind of underlying worldview it created for him, where he's constantly asking, does anything matter? Is anything permanent? And he can't give a sure answer.
Yeah, and I mean, I think we see that manifest in a variety of ways. Like, Lockwood is this incredibly caring person who's really doing a lot of kind things. We see examples in the text of him doing cases for cheaper than they probably should be doing them, just because he wants to help people, and because he feels so strongly about, getting vengeance on ghosts. We see him assembling his own like little group of agents in kind of this very ragtag found family kind of way at Lockwood & Co. He's bringing in all of these strays, as we've talked about. And he says straight out that he wants to open up to people. He wants connection. He wants to talk about the things he's been through. But that's still really hard for him. And sometimes he still falls kind of into the trap of choosing his ambition over those good traits. And we especially see that in like the middle and the beginning of the series, because he does evolve over time.
But then I do think towards like the end of the series as well, they've got a lot more money and they've got a lot more fame.
So he can afford to relax a little bit.
Definitely.
It's that thing where you finally achieve all of your goals and then you realize, were they worth it in the end? It was the friends we made along the way.
Yeah.
I mean, that is like Stroud's entire thesis, really, isn't it?
It was the skulls we made friends with along the way.
Yeah.
The real treasure was the ghosts we adopted along the way.
Because they're haunting the narrative.
Okay.
I very nearly said something that would have required censorship. We should get one F-bomb per episode and just go for a 12 rating or something. Anyway, I think it is like, yeah, fair enough. So I mean, it is true that his ambition is a little bit somewhat satisfied towards the end of the series, but there's still the question of why is he choosing that ambition at all? Like, why is it important to him? And I think, to me, it seems like when he's choosing his ambition, actually he's choosing the family legacy, which is choosing this search for meaning, because that's the core of all his motives.
Well, I also think even though he's made the company successful, I think it's not just, he's trying to answer this question of why me? And so he wants to be worthy of having been the one that lived. And I think it's interesting you bring up the search for meaning. You said you went back and reread The Empty Grave, I think, because that's directly in there. He says, though all it really does is show how arbitrary everything is. A ghost kills my sister. My parents die in an accident. Why did they die and not me? Believe me, I've looked for an answer and there isn't one. There's no meaning to any of it. So I think that sentence or that quote right there just encapsulates all of those feelings that he's having.
I love that, because I mean, to me, this is a big part of what makes him so attractive as a character. Like he could so easily become cold and cynical because he's endured all this tragedy. He could be one of those sort of dark, don't touch me loner characters like Batman or something. But he actually never lets the terrible things that have happened to him be the end of his story, because he's always pushing forward. He's still actually searching for that meaning. Which brings us to the final question for today's episode.
And to answer that question, we can go actually right back to another scene in The Empty Grave, a very important scene. So right after he's read his parents' lecture and they've decided to build the spirit gate with Jessica's death glow, he says the following thing to Lucy during a very important scene. But, here's a quote. "But I can see the rightness of everything that's happening now, and that's different. You remember in the cemetery, I told you how arbitrary everything was, how nothing had any meaning. I don't feel that anymore. Yes, my parents died. I now know why, and we have a chance to avenge them. My sister died too. Her death glow may help us save our lives tonight. More than that, we're nearing a solution to the problem. You know we are. When we get there, all this will be over, and we won't have to do anymore. It'll be all right, Lucy." Just like reading that quote kind of gives me chills, like especially after we've kind of traced his whole journey. And it's so notable that this scene ends with Lockwood telling Lucy all of this, and then he tries to give her the, wife sapphire necklace for the first time, and he's like really putting himself out there.
It's so gorgeous, like his arc in the latter half of the series, because he's really struggling to become more open, and like he has these emotional barriers. He has the famous emotional safety switch that goes off when something gets too intensely emotional for him. But he's in the last two books, he's really just not letting that win anymore. And the fact that finding this meaning in his parents' death, in that tragedy of their paths, actually enables him to open up to the possibility of a relationship with Lucy. So there's like a direct link between his nihilism, his attitude of none of us are here for very long, so all we can do is try and make a contribution while we're alive. There's a really direct link to that, and to like his okay, I don't want to say failure, but like it's a barrier between him and becoming who he's actually meant to be.
There's that tension between his instincts to reach out and to connect with them, and then this secretiveness and this hiding the hurt and covering it all over with charm and all of that we see early on. And I think that tension is then resolving, right?
Yeah, because he's found that meaning that he was looking for.
That lets him like reach out and connect. One thing with that, okay, the wife necklace thing, I think that's the first like meaningful conversation he has where he looks at her the whole time.
Oh, that's so interesting. I'm gonna have to go back and...
I mean, she's mostly looking at the necklace, but when she is looking at him, he's looking at her.
I must go back and look at where his eyes are. That's such an interesting thing.
Fascinating.
I always noticed it in that circle scene in The Creeping Shadow that like he's like looking at the ghosts and refusing to look at her.
I think that's also true of other conversations that they have even at the beginning of The Empty Grave, where he is refusing to look at her after she has like swung down at the trapeze and saved his life, and she confronts him about it and he's just looking away still.
Yeah, he's looking at his coffee, he's looking at the view.
Exactly.
And they're sitting side by side in the graveyard when he's telling her about the empty grave.
So he's looking straight ahead, not at her. Yeah. Okay, that's... Okay, now I'm just going to have to reread the books again. What a hardship.
But at the end, once he's found his meaning, you know, that's when he starts looking at her.
You could say that's very, like, metaphorical. Like, he's actually able to face life and face what he wants when he finds this meaning. Personally, what I find especially beautiful about all this is that he doesn't actually create the meaning. He finds it for himself. Like, it's ready-made and it's waiting for him to discover. So, like, to get pretentious for a second, if you'll bear with me, like, I would say he starts as an existentialist. So he believes that there is no meaning to life, so you have to create your own. But he ends up more in the line of virtue ethics, which posits that, like, the human being has a goal and a purpose that exists outside ourselves. And I'm going to finish by quoting Gandalf because I'm a Tolkien stan first and a human being second. That is an encouraging thought. So I think that we haven't even said half of what there is to say about Lockwood. But we hope you enjoyed this deep dive into him with us. And there will definitely be many, many more episodes about him.
And the Hollow Boy. And virtue ethics.
Virtue ethics!
And we haven't even talked about Lockwood's love for fashion, which I am excited to dive into. But if you have any burning questions about anything we've mentioned today or anything else, we would love to hear from you. You can email us at hauntingthenarrativepod@gmail.com. And you can find our website at hauntingthenarrative.wixsite.com/podcast. And you can find us on Tumblr at hauntingthenarrativepod and on X at HTN Podcast.
And quickly before we go, just a quick shout out to our amazing graphic designer, who is Tangent Bird, which I'm not going to spell for you, but you can find the link underneath whatever you're listening to this podcast on. So she's done all of the graphics, all of the logos, all of the episode covers for this show, and she is just absolutely incredible. So thank you for all of your help, TV.
Yeah, absolutely. And I really want that logo on a t-shirt, to be honest. I think
Let us know. You can email us if you would like podcast merch.
And on that note, I think it really is time to say goodnight, well, from the GMT crowd anyway. And thank you for listening. And from Ireland, because this is going to be Christmas time by the time you guys hear that, Nollaig Hannah.
Merry Christmas. Happy holidays.
Yes. Almost Happy New Year. We will see you all again in 2025.
Goodbye.
Good night. Thanks, everyone.